the light that you have now shone or put upon those who are looking after the purists, the fighters, that light will start now shining on them. Meaning that, the trainers, the handlers, and keep this in mind, wouldn't it be sensible that if a fighter fails a drug test, then the entire team should also be banned? Not just the one. He's not doing it to him. He can't be doing it to himself. He can't be administering himself.
Sure.
He has to have handlers.
Sure.
So if a man is banned, it shouldn't be the boxer. It should be the entire team with the boxer. Okay? Back in the day, I was the poster boy for drug tests. Okay? You could have the drug test before or after the fight. I had it before and after every fight, because you cannot have anyone, could there be anything dodgy going on with him? So I made sure that I was complete. No one can ever put that charge against me, because they will and they do. And they have done with Connor. But I say to you that there's something that doesn't feel right about it. If you've spoken to Connor, you know that he is.
Hello and welcome back to the number one podcast in the sport, where poor Dillian, really, this isn't the way for Dillian to go out. And not that it's sad to see, but I think if you consider where it's heading, this could be a story just as sad as what's happening with Danny Williams, or what's happened with Danny Williams in the last few years. Do you know what? When you get stopped in a round, there's probably not much to analyze. There's not much to overthink, because I always say with first round stoppages, shit happens. I was talking to a friend of mine, Dexter, and he lost in the first round. I just, mate, shit happens. Not to be an arsehole, not to be horrible, but shit happens. And the reason I say that is you haven't even had a chance to see if what you worked on worked. I know people say, yeah, well, your defense didn't work. Sometimes it's not that. You see, sometimes you go into that ring, you go to step back, you hear a crack in your knee, and you're like, oh no. And you now know your mobility is compromised, but you can't show your opponent that, but you know that. And you're kind of hoping, like, let's just get this over and done with. I can't do anything. And sometimes the first round stoppage is beneficial because you don't take a beating. Dillian didn't really take a beating. There was a shot on top of the head that obviously disorientated him. And I'll say this. People are going to start saying Dillian's chinny. The shot on top of the head, I have seen so many people with bulletproof jaws get hit on top of the head, and that's it. They've gone. You can hit them on the chin 100 times, they can ride that. But that shot on top of the head, maybe it's too much, neurological trauma from that direction that your brain just goes, nah, turn it off. I don't know. But if I'm Dillian, there's not much to read into that one fight. Obviously, you can look at the trend in the career and say it's not going up. But losing in a round is better than taking an 8-round beating that the referee's got to stop and Dillian's just hanging on to the ropes. I don't think that was necessarily an embarrassment for him, because there was a feeling that he could have carried on. However, if he'd have carried on, this is the point, boxing fans. What do we want here? If he had carried on, he'd just got completely wiped out, hurt badly, and you'd have taken even more mileage off that clock. So in a way, I'm glad that it went the way it did, because that's how it needed to go. Everyone got what they wanted. Dillian got paid. Frank got to see Dillian get put out of his misery. And Moses is added to his tag of legend killer. So in about 3 minutes, we just summarized the first round stoppage. But let's talk wider, guys. I always feel that, and I've followed Dillian from the days in Miguel's before he even turned pro, before he even had his first amateur fight. I've known Dillian, right? We've got a lot of people in common. I went to all his early fights, etc., etc. We can bore each other with, how far back it goes. Although we don't speak now, which is fine. The thing with Dillian, and my podcasting career kind of matched his peak. I always feel boxing used Dillian. The fans used Dillian. Think about this. All fans wanted was someone to beat up Joshua. In the ring, in the street, and they felt Dillian was that guy. Oh my God, Dillian. And everyone kind of got behind Dillian because after the first time they fought, was it for the British? I think it was. End of 2015. After the first time they fought, people were like, nah, give him a fair crack, give him time, he'll get Joshua. Dillian's sole existence was to beat up Joshua. Yeah? That's what it was. Even him, give him a WBC title shot, it was so he could get to Joshua. That's why I always feel Dillian was used by boxing. Dillian was never loved for being Dillian. Dillian was loved because he was a guy that could beat up Anthony Joshua. And that's why he got a fan base. He was a guy that had Anthony Joshua rattled, he had Anthony Joshua intimidated, he had Anthony Joshua sweating. And that in and of itself was enough for fans to go, I ride with this guy. And in a lot of ways, that's why I felt for Dillian. Because once Joshua's power started to wane, once people didn't care that much about Joshua, people didn't care that much about Dillian either, did they? He just wasn't interesting. And failing the drug tests, I think it was Rivas, and then for when he was meant to fight Joshua, failing those two didn't help him either. But once people realized Joshua was cooked, the Dillian situation made no sense to them. And people moved on and moved away from Dillian. And they started to look towards guys like Fabio Wardley, etc. And this is why boxing is so, so cruel. Because Dillian will look. And he'll look at how people are around him. And when he was making the millions, when he was doing pay-per-views, and Barry Hearn was slapping him on the back, Eddie Hearn was giving him a hug and praising him to high heaven, and they were all bigging him up, and he had everyone around him, and he had the usual crowd around him, right? And everyone used to tell you how much they loved Dillian, how much they believed in Dillian, how they scraped him off the streets and all this stuff. And obviously, the Dean White thing was happening as well, and suddenly all these guys they went from that being the double act that could guarantee you 6-figure views. They went from that to where they are now. And Dillian will be walking through an airport and he might get the kind of, what do you call it? Like the consolatory, well done, mate, you tried your best. And Dillian's a proud man, and he'll just be like, no, I don't want to hear that. I'm a fighter. I don't want to hear that. And he's 100% right. He's now got to go home and realize, one, he doesn't have the backing of the fans. And two, he's going to realize, actually, they only really wanted me to beat up Joshua or to beat up Fury, depending which camp you were in. I was just a convenient pawn in this game, a well-paid one. And, we shouldn't always use the fact that someone is well-paid as a justification for what they went through. Oh, well, you were well-paid, so actually us using you is perfectly fine. He's still going to go home and suffer. Because he's looking at that going, I have no idea where my career goes. I'm not going to get a Jake Paul fight. I'm not going to get a Francis Ngannou fight. I'm not going to get a Deontay Wilder fight. I'm not going to get a Fury fight. I might get a Chisora fight. But how much is that going to pay me after what people just saw there? But he'll also know He will not see this gold rush in boxing again. No one will. And if you get off the hamster wheel now, you might be leaving 3, 4, 5 million pounds on the table. He will know that, and so he's not going anywhere. And that greed, ladies and gentlemen, is what's potentially killing boxing. And you see that greed as it kills boxing? We need more Moses Ataumas. Because we've got to focus on Moses now. Moses did what I've been asking a lot of these young prospects to do. He made the old guys feel old in there. That's his only job. I will walk into a gym and I want the young boys and girls in that gym to train so hard, to spar so hard, that I feel I'm drowning. And I've got to look and say, yo, James, man, have you got your kids training like animals? I can't live up to this. This is too much for me. My body can't take it. That's how we came up. The goal was always to make the old guys feel old. So we trained ourselves into the ground. We probably ran harder, trained harder than we wanted to, but we wanted to set a marker to say there's a new standard and we own that standard. That's what Moses Atauma is doing. He's letting every heavyweight know, if you're not training to cope with the pace that I set, you don't stand a chance. I'm not small like Usyk. You do not stand a chance. And you saw that in the fight. Moses Atauma did nothing that I would say was otherworldly. It wasn't a tactical masterclass. It wasn't any genius. It wasn't this. It wasn't that. Do you know what Moses Atauma did? He threw a lot of very fast punches. And after he threw his very fast punches in large amounts, he just took a step back, created some distance, had a look, went in again. And he knew no heavyweight can train for the pace that he sets. I've told every heavyweight I've ever worked with, pace kills. If you follow this podcast, you hear me say it. Pace will turn the best boxer into a bitch in no time at all. Yeah, it will. If you do your strength and conditioning work for a certain amount of output, and someone sets a pace, that means you will burn through that output in 6 rounds. The second half of that fight, you have nothing left. You're fighting on instinct, bravado, courage, adrenaline, whatever it is you're digging up to fight. That's what you're doing. Moses understands that. The question is, how long can he sustain that for? If you look at Usyk, the answer is for as long as he wants. If he lives a life and he trains well and he's dedicated to this, he could do that forever. And so now Moses Atauma has set this problem because it's like he's 6'5", and he's a good 6'4", 6'5". There's no wearing he lifts, and he's a big guy, okay? He's definitely a big guy. So he's like, you're not going to outsize me. He came in at about 244 pounds, 245. So he's a big guy. He's Joshua weight. Do you mean he's Joshua's size? He hasn't filled out yet. That's going to be an interesting process. Whether he goes heavier or he holds his weight. I hope he holds his weight. Because if he can have that size and be that active and be that bouncy for as long as possible, he's now impossible for any of the guys on our heavyweight list to beat. Fury can't cope with the work rate. Joshua definitely can't cope with that work rate. Dubois can't cope with that work rate. None of these guys can cope with that work rate because they've never trained for it. Because I made a prediction. I think I was saying this. I said in the post-Wilder era, we're going to have heavyweights that are 6'4" and below. And they're going to be high work rate guys. They're going to be the guys that cause the problems. Because none of the guys, and I've been in enough heavyweight training camps, so you can believe me on this. None of the guys in the gyms are training for this work rate. They're not training for this output. Because they didn't see this coming. But I did. I knew this was going to be the kryptonite. It's the same way. If we take a football analogy, let's just look at football for a second, right? Manchester City controlled the Premier League by basically just passing to each other for ages till people got bored. And then eventually somehow the ball would find itself in the penalty box. There'd be a cutback and someone would finish, right? Taylor's oldest time. Eventually teams started training for the counter-attack and say, right, once we get the ball off City, we know that they're going to be really high up the pitch. Ball in behind. Someone with pace, go do your thing. And then City started getting taken apart. And then Pep had to hold a deeper line. And once Pep held a deeper line, his tactics, not that they fell apart, they just weren't as effective. And you looked at guys who were prepared for that. Klopp was prepared for that. Clearly, like guys like Nuno are prepared for that now. Iraola at Bournemouth prepared for that. And now that kind of control thing is struggling because there's an antidote to it. Arteta's struggling because teams are now just going after him. It's on the transition. So we're back to where Mourinho said football would be. We're going back to the transition. Can you play 2 passes out of the transition and be in the opposition box? If you can, you'll score. That's how quickly boxing tactics change. So we've gone through the era of the 6'8", 6'7", 6'6" guys with the reach and the strength and the power, the hard hitting. We've gone through that phase now, right? And that was very much, low volume. Joshua doesn't throw as many shots. Fury doesn't throw as many shots. Wilder never threw that many shots. And it was always there for someone who was active enough, with enough bounce and enough IQ to just force the pace. And Atama did that beautifully. We don't talk about his demeanor. He handled himself in fight week pretty well. I'll meet people, right? And they'll say, yeah, I heard this Moses Atama guy's arrogant. And I don't like that. And the reason I don't like that, and I don't like this in general, when people hear stuff second or third hand and then form an opinion based on it. Too much of this happens in boxing, and then it becomes like this established fact, and sometimes it can hurt careers. Moses is a decent kid. Spoken to him probably 4 times in the last 2 years. Think he's a decent kid. He's got a young man's mindset. The problem we also have is that I think this probably happened with Mike Tyson in his prime years. We expect these guys to be mature like we are, but they haven't been through life yet. Moses hasn't been through life yet. That perspective hasn't hit him yet, but it will do eventually. And when it does, he will calm down too. But people expect him to be this statesman-like guy, and I'm like, guy's job is to take heads off for a living. He's 20 years old. The world is feeling him in a way that he probably wasn't expecting 5 years ago. He's playing catch-up. But like I said, having met the kid, I think the kid's lovely. I think the kid's lovely, from a stable home. Clearly determined to take control of his career. Like the choices he makes are very much self-directed. And someone who doesn't get a lot of credit is Francis Warren. Like, I was speaking to Francis, probably last year actually, about Moses. And I remember him saying, we ain't going to rush him. Yeah, he's only 20 years old. He doesn't need to win a world title till he's 22, 23. We can build him. Because once he wins a world title, we want him to stay there and dominate. And Francis was talking about him like, look, we want him to have a Lennox Lewis type career, where you look at Moses Atama and he's a shoo-in for the Boxing Hall of Fame. And I like that perspective because it's the exact opposite of what Hearn was doing with Joshua, where he was overselling what Joshua was. Francis wasn't. Francis was like, look, there are a lot of challenges he has to overcome. And if he overcomes those, then he's a nightmare for anyone. And that's very true. And so as Brits, we should be cheering on Moses Atama. Here's a kid who has lived the life by the rules laid out by this country. I think it came over from Slovakia, went to school, did well in school like his brother did, never caused any trouble, no trouble with the law, just discovered boxing, dedicated himself to it, and he's done the country proud. He's worn the vest for this country, and he's won stuff for this country. So we should get behind him. Let's not look for reasons to dislike like we did with Joshua, because we're not being oversold, I don't think. Well, the normal morons are, right? Like the normal kind of, the rent-a-gobs. Yeah, they're out there, aren't they? Oh, they oversell them. They oversell everything, though. Why? Why do these guys oversell things? And the reason I say that is Moses Atalma is a high work rate southpaw, highly skilled, good sense of timing. You'd think that was a unicorn in the heavyweight division, wouldn't you? But the undisputed champion is that. Top Rank's number one heavyweight is that, and Richard Torres is that, by the way. Whether he's a rival to Moses, I don't know, but Richard Torres is definitely a southpaw who's a hard-hitting boxer, and he's got a high work rate. He's got that. Jalalov, who I think DeBella's got, he's that, and he's 6'7". So there are people that are credible competition for Moses. And that's why we all need to keep a sense of perspective, because Moses has to clean up. You know, Moses has to clean up, and he has to clean up in a way where there's no avoiding people. It's like, yeah, he's going to do the right fights at the right time so that when his career is done, there are no holes in it. And that's what we want. A career with no holes. That's why we love Ali. In Ali's career, there were no holes. There's no one he missed. Started off his career with Sonny Liston. Ended his career with Trevor Berbick. Yeah. Started his career, ended his career. I mean, he faced monsters at the beginning of his career. Well, not the exact beginning, but early in his career. And he signed off by facing a guy that went on to become a world champion. Right? Or was a world champion. I can't even remember if Berbick had the belt then. And so my point is this. We don't want gaps in careers. Mike Tyson, there aren't really gaps in his career. You might say, did he fight Riddick Bowe? But there were reasons why he didn't. He was obviously incarcerated, right? But he fought who he could fight when he could fight him. His natural rival was probably Evander Holyfield, and he fought him close to his peak. Obviously, he fought Lennox a bit too late. But you don't look at Mike Tyson's career and go, yeah, he ducked a load of people. The same with Lennox, same with Evander. That's why they get respected. And Moses can learn from that. That's the respect you want. He didn't avoid anybody. And I wish him all the luck in the world on that journey. Because it's not going to be easy. Because, look, everyone listening to this knows the fans are going to turn on him at some point. And it's this weird string. It's a very, very strange thing, isn't it? In human nature. We love someone, and then we hate the fact that we love someone because we feel helpless. And then the way we get control back is by hating them. I think a lot of people did that with Joshua. They loved Joshua till he lost to Ruiz, and they hated Joshua. And ironically now everyone's coming back around to loving Joshua. Although that might be the wrong time to do it, who knows. But let's not do this with Moses. Yeah, let's just back Moses like we back our football team. We know we're not going to win something. We know we're not going to win, but we enjoy the ride. We have fun. We throw plastic chairs around. We drink more Carling and Stella than we should. We start singing silly songs. You know what I mean? We might hoist people in wheelchairs up in the air and have a little song and a dance, right? We do stupid things when we follow our team because we will always follow England. And we need that attitude with our boxers. We will follow these guys for as long as they're willing to suit up for us, because that's just what we do. So people are asking, like, what do you do now if you're looking after Moses? The answer is what they're doing now. Like, this is that kind of Randy Orton legend killer phase of his career, where he's just got to find names and just deal with them. Get a Joe Joyce, deal with him. Who else is of that ilk? You might, Chisora won't take the fight, but you find guys like that. You might get a Pulev in there, deal with him. You know, they'll pull up a cruiserweight because they'll say we need someone with a high work rate. Deal with him. And then once you've kind of accumulated enough of those names, made a few mistakes, been in there with some guys who are wily, sharp, smart, then we start looking at belts and we start looking at, okay, now who are the rivals? Who's proven themselves to be a rival to Moses? Right, let's get him in with those fights and let's start giving him the money he deserves. That's what I would do. But I'm not Francis, I'm not Frank, I'm not George. They'll know what they're doing. They knew what they were doing with this one. And that's the bit no one talks about. Frank finally gets his win. And I keep telling people, don't underestimate how long Frank Warren will hold a grudge for. Frank never forgot that Dillian sandbagged the Fury fight. And to an extent, he kind of sandbagged this one. Yeah? And all Frank has wanted to do is put Dillian in his place. Potentially end his career. That's what Frank wanted to do. But it was hard, right? Because I don't believe for a second that Turkey knows who Dillian White is. So imagine you're petitioning Turkey to go, Turkey, all right? Like to make Dillian White versus Moses Atalman. Turkey's there like, yes, Moses, I like Moses. Moses, good prospect. Who is this Dillian White? And why is he black if he's white? Who is this man? Who is he? And Frank's explaining, he fought Joshua once upon a time and then tried to fight him again, failed drugs test. No, you don't get Riyadh season money. Put this on pay-per-view. Pay him from pay-per-view. The fans can pay for this. And I think Turkey did that. I think Turkey just said, I am paying for this. I don't know who Dillian is. I don't care about Dillian. No one in my orbit cares about Dillian. Frank, you can do whatever you want. You can come and host it in Saudi. Yeah, and we might give you some money for the event, but we ain't going to give you money for the purses. You're going to have to pay that out of the pay-per-view. I just think, and that's a sad indictment of where Dillian is. I don't think for a second Turkey wanted that fight. I'm not saying he's not high on Moses. I think he is, and that's why he said he'd like to see Moses against like Usyk or Moses against Parker, because he's like, this guy can go. But you didn't hear him say Dillian can come back. We'll have Dillian on Riyadh season. He's like, I don't know who this guy is. And that's the most damning indictment for Dillian, is that he's got nowhere to go. The fact that this wasn't sanctioned by the board tells you we won't see him in a British ring. So where do you go if you're Dillian White? You have one option, in my opinion, and that's the Deontay Wilder fight. That is the only option you have, unless you're banned in the States. That is the only option you have. And that's a sad indictment of where Dillian White's career is. A man who, look, we can talk all sorts about his failings in the ring and stuff, but Dillian White is a guy who, without an Olympic gold medal, without huge promotional backing, was able to build himself into a pay-per-view star. Dillian White, remember this. Dillian White would be in Miguel sparring Ian Lewison and Dominic Akinladi, and you'd be sat there watching it going, nah, I don't think he'll be as good as the other two. That was the consensus view of everyone that saw Dillian. I don't want people to now be like, I knew he was something special. Like, everyone's going to lie. All these people from South London are lying now. No one thought. So when Dillian fought Ian Lewison, everyone in Miguel's backed Ian Lewison to win. Everyone. I think it was like either 7-1 or 14-1, I can't remember. But there were really good odds on Ian Lewison to win. Everyone I know from Miguel's backed Ian Lewison. No one backed Dillian. That's the extent to which people are like, I'm not sure about him. Because he was raw and he was kind of wild. If he caught you, it was over. But that was a big if. And so, like, you'd see Dillian. Anyone that was at York Hall, like in the early 2010s, you'd see Dillian. Sometimes he'd have the silver jacket on. Sometimes he'd have the hoodie on. But he was there and he was a nice guy, friendly guy, funny guy, actually. People don't remember that part of Dillian. He was really, really funny. And then he blew. And let's be honest, he blew because of the Joshua rivalry. They needed someone for Joshua to have, that kind of rivalry with. And they found Dillian off his ban and they cooked him up nicely. And they said, right, let's do this. And he delivered. And once he delivered on that stage, people were like, I want to see him again. Because they felt that if you gave him a rematch, he'd do more damage to AJ. And from that, he built himself a multi-million-pound career. No one's done that since, I don't think. I think Dave Allen's tried. But Dave hasn't gone all the way because Dave's not a hard trainer. Dillian's a hard trainer. Like, people goes, oh, he was taking this, he was taking that. Even before the failed drugs tests, he was a hard trainer. But I'm going to come back to this point. Dillian was a guy that went into a gym and made people feel old. That's how hard he trained. And when you train that hard, you're going to blow past guys like Ian Lewison and Dom Akinladi because they don't train that hard off their own back. Dillian did. And he'll tell you, he's offered so many heavyweights a chance to be part of what he's about, and none of them could live with the intensity he trained at. Day in, day out. Fabio Wardley could, and that's why they are as close as they are. But no one else could. People came and went. And that's one of the lessons people can take. Because I think Dillian's the last of that. Well, that generation are the last of the really hard trainers. Now everyone's scientific. I see people wasting time with this boxing science guy who... You may as well just put the red nose and the lipstick on the guy. Do you know what I mean? But there's not enough of that. So let's praise Dillian for what he did, because he wasn't supposed to make it. Joshua beat the odds, yes, but Joshua won an Olympic gold medal, and he had Hearn hanging out the back of him, right? But Dillian never had that, despite being on the same promotional stable, Never, ever had that unequivocal backing from Hearn. He always knew that he was the ugly stepchild. And maybe that's why he behaved accordingly. I don't know. But we should give Dillian credit for how far he moved. Because, like I said, we were sat in Miguel's and you just be shaking your head like, nah, he ain't going to make it. He ain't going to win nothing in the amateurs. Never mind the pros. He ain't going to win nothing in the amateurs. And he did. That's crazy. That is crazy. I always think back to when he wanted to come to the lodge and Mick was like, nah, not you, mate. You know, I don't think Mick was proved wrong. I just think Dillian found another level. So credit to him for that. Bear with me. I'm just going to fly through a few things. It's far too early in the morning for me to be sharp, so bear with me. Number one, how brave is Barry Jones? You know, when you see Barry Jones, if you ever met Barry Jones, Barry's like a little guy. Like, he's not someone where you just be like, yeah, mate, I'm going to cross the road when I see Barry Jones. Barry Jones is a little guy. And when Barry Jones talks, he doesn't talk like he's built from anything. I'm not saying that to disrespect him. You know, Barry's okay. I mean, I think great boxing knowledge, great insight. Can get it wrong and calm sometimes, but who can't? But when Dillian stepped to him and Barry was like, mate, let's have it. And then did the same thing to Dean White, let's have it. And I was like, mate, that's you know, I don't know where he's from in Wales. We'll say Cardiff, we'll say Tredegar Park, we'll say St. Mellons, wherever he's from, Caerphilly, Merthyr, I don't know. But that came out of him straight away, where he's like, we'll have it on the cobbles anytime. And I rate that. And you could understand why, because he did it to Dean White as well. You can understand why that man was a world champion. And for lay people, that's what you call the switch. Yeah? People assume that to be violent, you got to be ranting and raving and get psyched up. You don't. You just go back into what you're trained to do. And he was like, right. And I imagine Barry was like, if I can make him miss and catch him on the chin, I can have him over. And I'm just like, fair play to Barry Jones, because that's how you're supposed to be. Do you know what I mean? That is how you're supposed to be. Also love this week seeing Eddie Hearn bury Dillian White after all those years of glazing him. Like, you know, Dillian should get the fight with Fury. It's not fair. Blah, blah, blah. And then he just buries him and goes, yeah, I don't want to see him in the ring again. But if he was a matchroom guy, you'd bring him back. Like, I didn't see that with Johnny Fisher. When, to be honest, Johnny Fisher got bested over 2 fights by Dave Allen. I didn't see Eddie going, yeah, I don't want to see him in the ring again. And he definitely looked like a fish out of water. Do you know what I mean? But this is what I mean. So I tell people, stop listening to these promoters. Just stop listening to them. Because it is a complete waste of time. Let me just wrap up by talking about Daniel Dubois and Tony Sims. I'm sure there's stuff that people will want me to talk about. That's what the Q&A is for all the stuff that I miss out on here. In all of this, I feel sorry for Don Charles. I'm going to tell you why. For years, Don had said, look, they never give me one of these top tier prospects. Right? And he'd say that. I remember I'd be sat there with Don and we'd just be talking in his gym. It was like, what gym was it back then? It was the Boxer gym, BOXR. And I always say to Don, be careful what you wish for. Because when they give you one of those guys, the scrutiny goes up. When you've got guys like Derek, no one expects much of them, so you can get away with a lot more. But when you've got those other guys, the scrutiny goes up. And I don't know if he understood what I meant, but I knew what I meant. And I was like, if you are given a guy like Anthony Joshua, the world is looking at you like, you better make him better than he was before. That's a lot of pressure, and everyone's watching what you're doing. And I don't think Don was prepared for that. Because if he was, then his reaction to that wasn't what it should have been. Don Charles is a good trainer. Like, if you measure a man or a trainer by what they do in the gym, Don Charles is a good trainer. Yeah? He knows what he wants. He knows what he wants someone to do. You can disagree with his approach, by the way. You can say, that's not how I want to box. That's fine. But for people who want to box that way, Don Charles is really, really good. That's Don. Don's a guy that comes alive in the gym. Don's also a guy that needs help with the outside the gym stuff. Because I don't think he understands these things like positioning, and sometimes you've got to protect not just your name, but you've got to protect the noise and the energy that's around you in the sport. So when he beat Joshua and he came out and did all the media stuff, I understood why he did it. Because for years he'd been disrespected by guys like Mark Tibbs. You know, you remember the press conference? I thought he was very disrespectful to Don, and I said it at the time, and I stand by it. You know, and so when you're disrespected like that, it shows what people think. And so when Don became that public figure, he had to clap back. But that put even more pressure on his shoulders. Like, right, you're going to fight Usyk next? Cool. Let's see what you've got. The Parker fight would have made more sense because I feel Dubois would have beaten Parker. Just because Daniel can throw as many punches as Joseph, and Joseph's not as mobile as Usyk, and he hasn't got the ring IQ. Don't try and convince me on this Andy Lee thing, because Andy Lee is just another version of the guy we're going to talk about next. So Don's got all this pressure and scrutiny. At this point, this is when Don needed to just pull rank and get some outside input. That's what I would have done, because I would have been like, look, Don, you got to run part of the training camp where Daniel stays in the hotel he's going to stay at in fight week. Yeah? You pick I don't want to call it a fallow week, but there'll be a week in camp where you're not doing a lot of sparring. You know what I mean? It's just like conditioning, training and stuff. And you can just have Daniel come in from that hotel for the 4 or 5 days you train, right? Drive up from Wembley, yeah? Let's work out what room we're going to stay in, or what floor. Let's stay in that room, get used to the bed, get used to everything psychologically so it's not a shock, right? If I was Don, I would have said this. I'd have said, you're staying in the hotel in fight week because Usyk's staying in the hotel, right? And he's got more of the belts. Stay in the hotel so you're familiar. The walk is second nature. You're not thinking about how to get there. You're not thinking about anything other than winning that fight. And I think these are the small things that, you know, when you're a good gym coach, you can sometimes overlook these things. But it's those small details. And what would that have done? That would have prevented the gathering. They're the things you've got to put your foot down on, because they've moved to Tony Sims, right? And Tony's not going to have any of that. Daniel Dubois will be in the hotel for his next fight. I promise you that. He will be in the hotel with Tony Sims. And if he's not in that hotel, he'll be in Tony Sims' house. I can guarantee that. And I look at that and I go, why wouldn't you have done that for Don? And then I just think Don didn't say we're doing that. That's my theory on it. I don't think Don put his foot down and said, Daniel, you got to stay in the hotel. I'm going to stay in the hotel. You're going to be in the room next to me. Yeah? Every day I'm going to check your vitals, make sure you're good. Yeah? That's how we're going to do this. I'm going to stay close to you. Dad can be in the room on the other side. I don't mind. But I'm going to stay close to you. That's what Don should have done, because then he could have said, look, we did everything we could. Usyk was the better man. Instead, we're now talking about Partygate. And did Don have control in camp? Did he get a chance to do what he wanted to do in camp? Was it the right sparring in camp? Was it this? Loads of questions. That this is what I've heard. When they showed up late, Frank was already spitting feathers, right? Because Frank's not necessarily high on Don Charles. Frank wasn't happy when they chose Don Charles. But they accepted, like, well, we're running out of options locally. Like, where do you want us to go? Manchester. So Frank wasn't happy initially. And then, obviously, the Joshua win happens. And Frank goes, maybe I was wrong, was the sense I got from what I heard. Maybe I was a little bit wrong. Let's give Don a chance. And I feel if Don had gone through with the Parker fight and won that, Frank would have had more confidence. But to go into this Usyk fight as undercooked as Daniel was, and he was undercooked. You know, his feet couldn't move, his head couldn't move. He wasn't really, it didn't look like he knew how to fight a southpaw. Same problems he had with Kevin Lorraine. I think Lorraine was the southpaw, wasn't he? Problems that should have been fixed. And so Frank's like, where's the progress? And that's what annoyed Frank. So this is even before Partygate, right? And then Frank hears about Partygate and he lost his mind. Lost his mind. Just lost his mind. Because he's now thinking, this isn't reflecting well on Queensberry. Like, what kind of control do we have over fighters in our stable? And that's when you saw Sam Jones show up, right? Now, Simon Jordan asked Sam Jones what his role was in the camp. Sam doesn't know. That tells you Sam is not the manager. Sam is there to be eyes and ears for whoever's controlling this whole operation. If it's Frank, it's Frank. If it's Spencer, it's Spencer. Whoever it is, Sam Jones is there to watch everything and keep people away. That's his job. And he will have the authority of the bosses to do that. And if that's not followed through, you'll see Daniel fighting people like Joe Joyce again. They won't put him on the top table. So that's the leverage Sam has. He doesn't really have a role. He'll just be on TalkSport talking out of his backside, pretty much. They've moved him to Tony Sims because they know Tony's a disciplinarian like that. Look, they know Tony will get it done. And sparring needs to happen with the Ben Davison lads. It's not far away. You know, all sorts of stuff can happen over there, right? So I get the logistics, but I feel for Don because I don't think Don Charles will get a chance at that again. I just don't. I think Don will go back to being a guy who has to fix damaged fighters. Like, fix them emotionally, get them loving boxing again, and then hope for the best. And that's a shame because he had a chance. If I was advising Don, I'd just say to Don, you need fresh blood. Now, I don't know if you bring George in, bring his son in, and let him have a bit more of a say. Why not? But I know George wants to fight again, so that's a bit tricky. But you need new ideas, fresh blood, a new way of doing things. And then instead, Don just focuses on the bit he enjoys, which is being in the gym with fighters. Let someone else handle all the logistics and stuff, because that needs to be a lot tighter, just as an outsider looking in. I didn't realize this was going to go all the way to 50 minutes. So apologies for this, guys. But we also have to talk about the hoax, the clown, Krusty the Clown, whatever you want to call him, the donut. You know what I mean? The smug bastard. You know, go to Adam. I've never understood the public's fascination with Adam Booth. You see, when I was young, so I came up in the Adam Booth hype era, like full hype cycle with Adam Booth. I was in that and I was like, whoa. And like, you heard people talking about this guy like he's a boxing revolutionary. You read the boxing news. Yeah, Adam Booth is revolutionizing boxing. He's doing this, he's doing that. But you never really got a lot of detail. Like, he'd come out in interviews and he'd just give really, like, bland kind of, not anecdotes, but sound bites. He'd talk about, yeah, you know, we'd like to give the electrolyte balance where it needs to be. And, you know, sort of stuff that, you know, sounds smart to dumb people. And people just lap it up. And then, like, when I got kind of into the lodge and I'd hear people who were close to David talk, and I was hearing that, no. When David got out to Miami, it's the Cubans that trained him. Whether you say it's Rubio, whether it's Salas, the Cubans were training David, allegedly. And Adam Booth was allegedly taking notes. Yeah, oh, what does this session do? Okay, right, okay. We're going to do this and then take it back. There's all sorts of allegations. Some allegations Adam Booth couldn't keep David under control. David wasn't training as many sessions as he should have done. And Adam was just like, what can I do? And that's one of the reasons he struggled against Carl Thompson and lost. And you can drop all of the list of offenses. People who had seen him training David Hay were like, the exercises he had David doing were ridiculous. The only reason those exercises even looked possible was because he had David doing them. And David's, like, in terms of fast twitch, you know what I mean, 1 in a million. Everyone else he tried to do that stuff with, he was breaking them. I mean, that's what I was hearing. So I don't know if this is true or not, but he was breaking fighters because he had these dumb exercises. And the idea was, you know, maximize resistance on some of these plyometric moves, which isn't what you should do, actually. And most people knew that before Adam Booth was even a trainer. So I've built this impression of him being a hoax over a number of years because I've heard things. Yeah, I've seen people go in that gym and go, I'm not training with this guy. He's going to injure me. You look at the state of David Hay, and you wonder what David would have done with a better trainer. I think he'd have achieved more. I actually think David Hay underperformed in his career because he trained with Adam Booth. I think Adam Booth is the most overhyped trainer. Now, I'd put him, like, you know, we made out like he was one of the greatest trainers in British history. I'd put him, he's in that kind of Tony Sims box for me. He'll get you to a British title and he'll do all that stuff. But beyond that, he's in over his head. David Adelaide fights Filip Hrgovic. I have no idea what the tactics were in that fight. But we know Adam Booth is synonymous with a low punch output. So at least he had his stamp on that fight. But he has to understand he got lucky with David. That style and approach he has doesn't really work that well. It just doesn't. And it's going to be a hard lesson for anyone that trains with him going forward when they realize this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He just doesn't know what he's doing. Boxing's kind of moved beyond him. All those ideas he had 20-something years ago where he thought he was a Dark Lord, we've all moved past that now. We're done. It's been debunked. A lot of his stuff has been debunked, but he's not the only one. Like, a lot of Charles Poliquin's stuff has been debunked, and we've all had to move on. A lot of Louis Simmons' stuff is getting debunked now. We're having to move on. And, you know, this is just how the sport goes. You know, the idea that you can be a low economy fighter like David was, it only works if you've got a hard, accurate punch. Ryan Burnett didn't have that. Josh Kelly doesn't really have that. And he'll still have them on this kind of low economy style, like, just don't do too much. All this stuff. I look at him and I look at him over the last 25 years and I'm saying, David Hay has 6 bolts in his spine, apparently. I put that at Adam Booth's shoulders. And people say, oh, it's because David didn't train properly. I'm like, yeah, but he was doing all the wrong training. Did Ryan Burnett retire because of a broken back? Or an injured back? Whatever it was, that's the question I'm asking. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of guys have left Adam Booth with injuries. Now, if I remember, did he train Andy Lee? I think he might have trained Andy Lee, and that's why you're seeing a lot of that happen now, where Andy Lee's got the Adam Booth approach, where the stuff they talk about isn't the stuff they implement. So they'll say stuff that makes them sound competent, and then they'll get a stable of fighters where people go, oh, he's a good trainer. But it will come out that he doesn't do that much. I am confident of that. It's going to come out he doesn't do that much. It's not magic. Yeah? And he's at that point now where if he adds another couple of fighters, you're going to hear the descent. he doesn't give you enough time. He palms you off to this guy, palms you off to that guy. That's going to come soon enough. And then we're going to be in the same place when it comes to Andy Lee and go, is he a hoax as well? This is just how the game works. That's why it's better to be transparent. Had Adam Booth not been that mysterious guy, like not answering any questions unless it's to my advantage, and I answer loads of questions so I can spin a story. So I didn't necessarily agree with that. I'm not overly sold on Mr. Booth. And what I would say is fighters need to be careful about chasing name brand guys, because Adam Booth could potentially harm your career physically. Do you know what I mean? That's why I look at guys like Shane. And I always give Shane credit, because Shane has all of that kind of talk that Adam used to have, but is grounded in stuff. Like, Shane doesn't go overboard. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not pseudoscience the way Shane does it. It's just really practical stuff that's built on experience. So that's why you go to guys like him. Joe G is the same. But Joe doesn't even get too involved in the strength and conditioning stuff. Do you know what I mean? He'll give that to people who understand that part of the world. He'll focus on what he's good at. And sometimes in boxing, I think you just got to focus on what you're good at and not try and be good at everything. But I don't even know what he's good at. Like, if you took most of your boxing approach from the Cuban guys you watched training David while you were telling us you were his trainer, I don't know. When you allegedly was sat in a sponsorship meeting with a boxer saying, I need to get paid before the boxer does, and you're like, I want my cut first, then you pay him. Got to kind of go, what's going on here? And there are a few stories like that where Mr. Booth allegedly put his nose in the trough before the boxer got a chance to. But make of that what you will. Right, guys, I've talked myself to death now. I'm going to say have a great day. As always, if I've missed anything, hit me up in the Q&A. You know how we do. And, you know, let's hope for better times in boxing. Yeah, because I'm hearing stuff that if what I'm hearing is true, and that is a big if I'm hearing is true and I'm not being trapped into anything or being drawn into anything, what I'm hearing might be the most surreal thing that I could have heard in boxing. Now, am I at liberty to speak on it? If they can't, I definitely can't. Can I drop some breadcrumbs and let you guys, the fans, do the digging and ask the hard questions? Will I drop some breadcrumbs? How will you know that the breadcrumbs are being dropped? You'll just have to be smart. That's all I can say. You'll have to read between so many lines, but once you do, you'll get it. But I don't want anyone asking for clarification or explanation. When the content goes, it goes. Don't ask me a damn thing. If you can't figure it out, then it ain't for you. It's as simple as that.